Hi, baby boomer fans. We are Jackie and Janine, the Pfeiffer Sisters, and love to talk about the 1950s, inviting you to reminisce with us as we explore experiences of that decade.
We chronicle the distinct memories of our childhood in our book, While the Windmill Watched, a slice of rural America in the 1950s, which takes you on a notably historic journey through that often forgotten decade. We also want to hear about your experiences during the 1950s. We will feature guests whose special stories of that decade will bring to mind magical moments of reflection, some with tears, some with smiles, but above all, a good dose of laughter.
We would like you to chat with us as we bring to mind the sights and sounds so familiar to that time in history. Grab your favorite malt or Green River. Make sure you are wide awake and get ready to be inspired about the 1950s. Welcome to the 1950s Fun Chat. Oh, hello, viewers and friends. We're so glad that you're joining us today. You know, Jackie, a lot of times people will ask us, where do you find your guests to be on the Fun Chat? Well, many places, oftentimes they're recommended by other fun chatterers. But this particular guest today, I discovered on Facebook, and he's a member of the Facebook group called the North Dakota History of North Dakota Cities, Towns, and Places. And he just had a wonderful comment and post. And so I thought, this is about North Dakota. This is very, very interesting. And so we're going to try to capture more of that story that our guest has today.
And before we begin, viewers, please look at the bottom. You will see a beautiful purple stripe, and within that stripe, www.whilethewindmillwatch.com is the address to go for you to find out all about the windmill, the book, and the Fun Chat, and so many other things that are listed there. So do check out whilethewindmillwatch.com. Also, take a look at the upper right-hand corner. You'll see a picture of a beautiful North Dakota sunset, which wraps around our book, While the Windmill Watched. And notice a little white dot in the lower right-hand corner. That indicates a very, very important event that happened, an award actually. In the little book was given the 2022 National Independent Press Award in the regional nonfiction category as its distinguished favorite. So we are glad to have that little medal on our front of our book. So let us begin with that very interesting guest that Janine was speaking of. His name is Ben Kubischta. He came into this world in March of 1950 in the town of Hope, North Dakota. He was raised on a farm and attended Hope Public Schools before attaining an associate's degree in agricultural drafting and estimating from the North Dakota State College of Science in 1970. He then worked for the North Dakota Department of Transportation for 44 years. So Ben married Judy Petrick on April 28, 1973, and they've lived in Bismarck, North Dakota their entire life. They have 4 children, 10 grandchildren, and 2 great-grandchildren. Ben is retired from the North Dakota Department of Transportation. However, he's an avid volunteer and a popular speaker on a variety of topics concerning highways, touching on history, construction, safety, and much more. So Ben, welcome to the 1950s Fun Chat.
Welcome. It's great to be here, Jackie and Janine, and
Thank you.
I'm excited to be able to share stories that I know with you and your viewers.
All righty. So first of all, we'll start with the 50s since this chat is primarily around that decade. So what are some of the memories of the 50s that have influenced your life? Now that there might be quite a few, but just pick a few, please.
Well, let's start with Sputnik.
Okay.
You know, the first satellite that went up into the air. And I remember going outside of our house when it's dark, the whole family was out there, and looking up in the sky and finding Sputnik. I think Dewey Berquist, the weather guy out of Fargo, would tell us where to look for it. So we'd look up in the sky and we found that little dot moving across the sky. And that, you know, really began all that satellite era. And then Telstar comes along a few years later. United States space program. So Sputnik really had a big impact on me there.
Mm-hmm.
Gosh, Ben, anytime I look up in the sky, all I see are stars. I'm impressed with what you saw.
Okay, and what else can you mention, please?
Well, one was riding in school buses. Hope never had the big yellow buses. We Hope public schools, all their school buses were contracted out to local people. So somebody would put in a bid, and some guys use station wagons to haul their kids. Our bus driver just had an old panel delivery truck, and in the back where they would haul whatever, he had benches on either side of the truck in there. So we just sat in benches as kids were packed in, and the big kids, maybe a couple of them, got to sit up front with the driver.
Oh, and in all weather conditions, I suppose.
That's correct. And then he's driving on these rural roads and going over hills, maybe a little faster than he should. And then you got that feeling in your tummy. When, whoa, that was fun. And sometimes we were first to be picked up, and sometimes you were last. So
nothing too regular, huh?
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else that you might mention before we move on?
Radio programs. Today, my favorite media to listen to is the old radio programs that from the 1930s up into the 1950s. And the first one I remember is being in the barn where we had a radio on, out with my dad and older brother, and they were doing chores. And the Lone Ranger was on. And I remember the episode I remember is the very first episode of the Lone Ranger when he gets shot and all the other Rangers get killed. He's the only survivor. Tonto comes and saves him, and then he starts wearing his mask. So radio programs from that era, I enjoyed, and I still enjoy those today.
Mm-hmm.
Ben, was that program the content of that program? That was the first time then, or the cause of the Lone Ranger beginning to wear a mask?
Yes, when it starts out, he was he's a Texas Ranger.
Oh, okay.
And I don't know how many were out, but they all get killed except for one person. And he's found by Tonto, nursed back to health.
Okay.
And in order he wanted to preserve his identity, and he would wear the mask.
Interesting. I never knew the history behind
it. I didn't either. But we know he does. His bullets were made of silver, though.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, there was a mine that only he and Tonto knew where it was at.
Oh.
So is that how Silver the horse got his name, or just because of his color?
Well, I'm thinking it was both. It was a white horse, and then also with the silver mine and the silver bullets.
Hi-ho, Silver.
Away!
That's cool.
The William Tell Overture was introduced to children in that,
That's right.
Program.
And one Christmas item we got probably around that time, the late 50s, maybe into the early 60s. Our parents bought these plastic horses.
Mm-hmm.
And so we had like the Lone Ranger and Tonto and Bat Masterson and probably half a dozen of them. And we were not allowed to play with them.
Mm-hmm.
So they sat up on top of the kitchen cabinets for years and years, and Mom would only let us take them down for a brief moment. And they had little pistols and hats and bridles and stuff, and horses and saddles.
Do you happen to have them?
I have mine.
Yeah.
And I have Tonto and Bat Masterson, and the little pieces are gone, but those statues are still here, still in great condition.
I bet the North Dakota Museum would like to have those.
They might. Another thing I got, baseball was my first love. So and Willie Mays was my only sports hero. My parents got me little statues of Willie Mays about that time, around 1960 or so. And I still have that.
Did you play baseball?
Yes. I never was any good.
Okay.
I had 5 seconds of fame in baseball.
Woohoo! Better than some people.
That's right. We were playing a Legion game up in Portland, and I was probably 18 years old then. And I was a left fielder, and there was a fly ball hit to left field, and I was following it. I was backing up. And in those days, our outfield fences were the wooden snow fences. So I'm backing up. I'm going back. I see this ball. I catch it. I hit the fence. I flip over the fence, land on the other side. I look, the ball's still in my glove, and the umpire calls the guy out.
All right.
I could never hit the ball, but I had that one little moment of honor.
Well, good. So you've led us to about age 18. So then at about age 18, you went to college. And so what made you decide to major in architectural drafting and estimating? Tell us what that entails also.
Well, I looked at colleges, and you get their books and you look at them. And we did in high school and shop, we had, you could work on motors, or we did some drawing and what have you. And architecture kind of intrigued me. So I thought, okay, I could go to the science school and take up architectural drafting and estimating. And it was a 2-year program, and we did quarters at that time. And I didn't really know where I was going to go to work before. When I graduated, I was lucky I got scholarships from a couple of lumber companies. And most architectural drafters either went to work for an architect office or a lumber yard. And in 1970, the highway department, we were right in the middle of that interstate construction. And the highway department needed both civil techs, along with hiring engineers. They needed civil engineering techs at science school trained, and they need drafts people to draw the plans that the engineers would design. And so they came down and interviewed us, and they put me on their list of somebody they wanted to hire. A couple of us went to Bismarck to tour the central office building, which was just completed in 1968. And to me, it was a brand new building, and I wanted to work in that new building. And
was that the former BJC?
Yeah, yes, wasn't it?
No, well, not at that time. The highway department was in the BJC building on the corner of Boulevard and State Street, or 83. Yeah. And for a few years, and then in the mid-60s, Highway Commissioner Walt Yelley finally gets permission from the legislature to build a new building to where we could have everybody in Bismarck and the Central in one location. When we were at the BJC building, we had employees at BJC. We had them at Fort Lincoln, which is United Tribes Technical College today. We had them in the Anderson building in Bismarck, which was on the southwest corner of 3rd and Front, and we had them in another spot. So we were all over town until Yelley gets the building built on the Capitol Grounds campus.
Okay. Ben, I'm particularly interested in your knowledge of Old Red, Old 10. And I think that starts way before the 1950s. Can you start to elaborate about that, please?
Sure. I'd like to start out with a comment. A couple years ago, I wrote a story about all the transportation history projects I was involved with the DOT. And I started that report and ended it with the same sentence. And I'm just going to read that to you. And surface transportation historically was, currently is, and will continue to be the most important factor in the history of the place that is North Dakota. We got all kinds of other things going on, but if we don't have good surface transportation, we never would have had a good economy back in the Native period where they were trading goods by ground from the coast to here. And then when the Europeans come. And in 1912, when motor cars are starting to arrive on the scene, people were trying to figure out what's the best way to get across the United States. And the American Automobile Association hires this gentleman, Anton Westgard, who was called a pathfinder. He would go out and blaze trails across, or identified trails across the United States. In 1912, Westgard set out on a journey in June from New York through North Dakota to Seattle to San Francisco, back to New York, and then back across the continent to Los Angeles. And this was like about a 12,000-mile journey that he started in June and completed in Thanksgiving. And he would go across the United States, identifying the route, where to turn, and how far. He had a mileage counter. And when he got to North Dakota, he was going to go north to Grand Forks, to Williston, to Glacier Park. But he gets to North Dakota and realizes that if he goes straight across the state from Fargo to Beach, and once he gets into Montana, he's going to be right between Yellowstone National Park, Glacier. So that was the beginning. He comes through. A year or two later, the American Trailblazers come through and they mark the highway. And we did not have any route names yet, or everything was just marked by a trail name. Westgard calls the one through from Seattle to New York the Northwest Trail. The Trailblazers come through in 1913 and start marking this trail with red paint.
Okay.
So if there was something that you wanted to go straight, it would be a marker, a wooden post, be white, a horizontal red, and then a horizontal white. There was a curve, it would be white with a red arrow telling you where to turn. If there was something coming up ahead, like a railroad crossing or a steep hill, it might be an X or something of that.
And were these marks put on wooden posts in the ground?
Yes, they were all wooden posts. The folks would probably get money from the business people in these towns to help pay for marking the route to their town. So they're all wooden posts.
Oh, okay.
So it becomes known as the Red Trail right away.
So was there a little bit of shuffling and what's the term I want to use in order to get the road to come through your town? Lobbying? Was there lobbying for that?
Well, yes, because the people that were promoting this was really the business people.
Oh, okay. Sure.
Okay, so Westgard comes through and he's Fargo to Beach. And, he goes through every little town along the way. From Bismarck is like Minokan, Mackenzie, Sterling, Dawson, all those little towns. So they're on the route. but there was competition between this Fargo to Beach route against the route that would come through South Dakota and then Hettinger and Bowman.
Oh.
And then when it came to building bridges across the Little Missouri River.
Mm-hmm.
In 1915, there was a bridge that was needed to be built in Medora to get across the river.
Mm-hmm.
And Billings County in 1915 was poor. There was oil down there, but it was still quite a few years later before they started pumping oil out of the ground in Billings County. So Billings County could not afford to build a bridge across the Little Missouri.
Oh, the county had to do it.
Yes, county paid for all the bridges up until middle 20s or 22.
Uh-huh.
So the Red Trail and National Parks Highway became known as National Parks Highway. They went out and raised money from Fallon, Montana, which is just west of Miles City, to Fargo. So almost every town along the way contributed money for that bridge to be built in Medora. And it was a one-lane bridge.
Oh, no.
That's
all they could afford.
Yeah, that's right. And that lasted until 1940, 42, and the Highway Department replaced it.
Okay.
Then the North Dakota Liberty Memorial Bridge was built in 1920, 22. That was the very first huge, big bridge built by the state of North Dakota.
Mm-hmm.
And a couple little things I found about researching on that when I did my research for that story. The bridge was named in honor of the soldiers and sailors of World War I, but it was not dedicated to them. It was dedicated to the people of North Dakota.
Oh, interesting.
So, yeah, and now the new bridge was dedicated to the service people. But the initial bridge, and that was because it was the very first big project the Highway Department did, and the Highway Department had to get, you could say, the blessings or the concurrence of the entire state in order to build that bridge.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, that bridge was, I think, very quite impactful in the lives of little children who were in their family car as they went over that bridge, and the noise it made and the vibration that it made, and then you could look out your window and look down to the river. It was kind of an amazing bridge.
That bridge sang.
It did.
That's right. And a lot of people
and
called
what in B flat, Janine?
I can't remember. So were other bridges, had other bridges like that one that spanned the Missouri between Bismarck and Mandan? Had they been built in other parts of the country?
Yes, bridges have been built, but the North Dakota Liberty Memorial Bridge was the first bridge across what we would call the Upper Missouri, maybe from some point in maybe Iowa all the way into Montana.
Was that a standard? Oh, sorry, Finn, go ahead. I was going to say, is that a standard design? Was that design used on other bridges, or did each state or county, whatever, design their own?
Well, that bridge was, I can't remember the designer's name, but it was called a Warren Truss. And after that, the Highway Department in North Dakota started designing our own bridges. They'd pick out a different truss design. We used different ones. We built bridges across the Missouri in Williston, Saanich, Van Hook. We were proposing bridges in Washburn, the Big Bend, who's up near where the dam is, and at Fort Yates. Across the Little Missouri up north, we built one there. So we built all these big bridges by 1934.
Okay. Back up.
Oh, go ahead, Jackie.
I was going to say, Saanich and Van Hook are now underwater under the Garrison, because of the Garrison project, the Lake Sakakawea. Did they dismantle those, or are they just still underneath all that water?
Well, two bridges were impacted by the dam. The Four Bears Bridge, which is north of Halliday, and then the Sanish Bridge, which was named for Verendrye, that explorer that came down here in late 1700s. Both those bridges had to go. So what the Corps of Engineers did, they moved Four Bears Bridge upstream, and I think they floated some of those truss members up. So they left the Verendrye Bridge in place. They built the second Four Bears Bridge at what becomes Newtown on piers that are high enough to be above the lake level. Then they destroyed the Verendrye Bridge.
Okay, they dismantled it and recycled?
Well,
whatever.
Yeah, the steel probably went to recycling places somewhere or used.
Melted down.
I haven't researched what really happened to it, but it got torn out.
Okay, thank you.
Were the types of bridges that were built in North Dakota over bodies of water built that particular style because they could withstand flooding better, or was there a particular reason why that design of a bridge was used?
Well, in those early eras, those through truss bridges were preferred for larger spans.
Okay.
Probably because we hadn't yet perfected the steel beams and concrete beams for the longer spans that were coming ahead. We were building some concrete and steel beam bridges. We had small truss bridges that didn't have like the top that you drive through, just had trusses on each side. Those were called pony trusses. But the bigger the through trusses, they probably, what we had available for our designers at that time could carry the loads. It might have been more economical to build than the ones we're building today.
Okay. So the old red trail, then after it was a dirt trail across North Dakota, then tell us of the progression of that, of modernity of the old red trail.
Yeah. Chief Engineer Robert Bradley, who was he was chief engineer up until 1980. He was interviewed in our first program with Prairie Public, Rivers, Roads, Rails, and Air. And then his segment was used again in the Red Trail. But Bradley comes on board in 1937. And in his interview, he talks about these awful roads that we had. And it took all day just to drive out to Medora. So it probably was a 2-day trip if they had to go out there. So we went from dirt roads to some kind of graded roads. If you would drive around on a prairie trail in North Dakota today or township roads, that's about what our roads look like in the 1930s. So, but when the 30s come along, we started putting some asphalt on our roads. And a lot of it was cold oil and gravel mixed in place, and then bladed out with motor graders and then packed down. And we did a lot of that up until World War II. And then after World War II, we had better equipment and better pavers, and we could get into what was called hot mix paving, is what we do mostly now on our roads. And we could build a better section for carrying the loads that keep getting heavier and heavier and heavier. So our little towns were thriving. Hebron and Glen Ullin and Beach. Sentinel Butte was doing good. Minokan was doing good. Sykeston, not Sykeston. Yeah, that was a little town. But Sanborn, Buffalo, and all these little towns were all dependent upon traffic moving across North Dakota.
Mhm.
Tourist cabins, gas stations, cafes and stuff.
Right.
And then
So
something,
excuse me. I'm sorry. Were you saying something more?
well, you comment, and I was going to say what happens in the 1950s.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
go for it.
Yeah. Well, the interstate era begins in
Okay.
the 1950s.
So is this we're past the original paved old 10, what I think what you often refer to as old 10. Then there got to be old 10, which in our lives was new 10
Yeah.
before the interstate.
So then I think what you're leading to, maybe not, is the Federal Aid Highway Act signed by President Dwight Eisenhower in 56. Is that where you're going?
That's right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because 1917, the highway department gets formed. We get federal aid. We actually start trying to figure out how to do these highways. Then the very first memo that the Highway Commission sends out in April 1917 is how to drag a road using horses and logs. How to drag a road.
Yeah.
So then we start actually grading roads better, using gravel and scoria in some places. And then our grading in the 30s gets better. Our surfacing pavement gets better. And President Eisenhower signs this Federal Aid Highway Act in 1956. But the seeds for the interstate system actually start in the middle 1940s. The United States was building freeways in the late 30s. There were some in the East Coast. I got a report, a document I've read in Denver. They were planning a controlled access facility with interchanges in 1944. Congress in 1944 passes Federal Aid Highway Act that includes a national highway system, but they didn't have any money for it. So the 50s come along, and the highway department, we were planning for improving the highway system. We had we started building bypasses of town. Highway 10, we were moving it away from going through town. So we built bypasses of Hebron and Glen Allen. We didn't do any to the east of Bismarck. We were planning a bypass of Medora. I got pictures from the early 1950s of where that route was going to go. We were even planning a bypass of Mandan in the early 50s. And then the Federal Aid Highway Act in 1956 comes. And so Eisenhower probably is given more credit for the interstate system than what he deserves because it was already being planned. But what the most important thing that Eisenhower really did, he gets Congress to pass a tax. You know, some people today are afraid of taxes, but if it wouldn't have been for the federal motor vehicle tax of 1956, we would not have the Highway Trust Fund and we would not have the interstate system.
Okay.
Correct me if I'm wrong. I thought that at one time I'd heard that President Eisenhower was interested in the interstate system across the United States because it had to be such that you could land a jet on it. Was that correct?
You know, I've heard that story too. That's one of those that could be a myth or it could be true. I'm not certain what the real answer is.
Something like every 2 miles, there had to be a straight line. And there are plenty of those in North Dakota.
Yeah, you know, I'm leaning towards more myth than truth.
Oh, okay.
Fun story.
Well, that's a good one.
Yeah, and while there have been aircraft landed on the interstate because of something going on with that.
Yeah.
But it was named the National Defense Highway System.
Uh-huh.
So it was tied. There's stories you hear about, we'll build this interstate system so we can evacuate cities if we know New York or Atlanta or Des Moines is going to be under attack and we have to evacuate.
Mhm.
But you couldn't evacuate people fast enough.
No.
We've seen pictures of hurricane evacuees out of Florida or someplace trying to move out, and
Yeah.
the whole freeway system gets
Yes.
Backlogged, yeah.
But
So
it certainly was a treat to drive on those interstates after having been on a 2-lane highway.
Yeah.
right. So I'd like to know if you happen to know, how long did it take North Dakota to actually begin its interstate construction after 1956? And why did it begin kind of in the middle of the state?
North Dakota was ready.
Okay.
The governor then was Governor Davis, I believe, and the
John
highway
Davis.
commissioner was Wentz. And we had been planning because we started a planning division in the late 30s. So we were looking ahead toward this. We knew that Act of 44, and we were planning. We were ready to go. That act gets signed by Eisenhower in 56. I don't remember the month. By October and November of 1956, we let our very first contracts for constructing bridges on the interstate system.
Mhm.
Okay.
And the first segment we selected was the segment between Jamestown and Valley City, because that was the worst. That portion of Highway 10, which went from Jamestown to Eccleston to Sanborn to Valley City,
Mhm.
was the worst condition, was in the worst shape of any segment of US 10. So that's why we started with that one
Okay.
first.
Did
Okay.
it matter, or was there a count back then as far as the number of fatalities that occurred in certain parts of the state, as far as
Yeah,
what the next section of road would be?
yeah. Safety has always been the highway department's DOT's number one priority. So we've always been cognizant of that. We've always been moved in safety. One of the first things we did was try to eliminate railroad crossings and build railroad overpasses and underpasses. So safety has always been a concern. The interstate system really provided much safer highways. The fatality and injury rate has always been way lower on those 4-lane controlled highways.
Okay, so then going back to the interstate being built, the last section of the interstate when was that completed, and why was it the last section?
I'm going to look in my book. I looked there just this morning, but I'll look again.
Well,
The
when I was going to college in Fargo,
Yeah.
that was still being built. That section.
The last segment was Fargo South down to the South Dakota line. And the very last segment was from North Dakota 13 down to the South Dakota line, and that was completed in 1976.
Okay, I guess I was thinking of the east-west one. It was Dawson, or was it something that the Dawson section?
Yeah, the Dawson section.
I-94.
Yeah, one right past your home country there. Okay. East Bismarck to Dawson, 1966.
Yes.
That's when your segment was completed. And the last I-94 section completed was Montana to Medora, 1969.
Oh,
so from our very first contracts were let on 94 and 1956, we completed those 350 miles in 13 years.
Okay.
My. And Jackie, do you remember when the interchange was built right by our farm, the Minokan interchange?
I do, yeah.
Yes,
Mhm.
it was very interesting. And Ben, I mentioned to Ben yesterday when we were had a conversation that do you also remember when they wanted to, they being whoever was working on the interchange, wanted to sod that and came to Dad and asked to purchase sod. And his reply was, I'll sell you sod if you'll sod our yard. And so that's what happened. That's how we got our yard sodded.
Yeah, that's how we get our lawn.
And
So
then
they
you,
took sod from a lower part of the pasture, which was sub-irrigated by the Apple Creek.
Mhm.
Mhm. So it was
Great.
pretty good sod, pretty good to get grass.
and
So,
there was opposition in North Dakota, a huge amount of opposition to constructing the interstate.
Oh yeah,
Oh, really?
tell us.
And the highway department lawyer at that time was Vernon Peterson, who became a North Dakota Supreme Court justice.
Okay.
And he wrote, he was quoted in the 1979 Highway Department history book about going to meetings in Governor Davis's office with irate and upset people who were almost had Davis convinced not to build the interstate in North Dakota.
Wow.
And, some of it was, they're cutting across my land. They got to buy these 400 acres. They're going to be bypassing my town. And it was fears, some of it legitimate, some not, about people not wanting this interstate. How am I going to get my tractor across the road? I got stuff to combine on the other side of the field. Well, we're going to put up an overhead crossing. Yeah, but that's 2 miles. I got to go 4 miles out of my way. So,
Yes.
so do you remember your dad and mom and other friends, what their thoughts might have been when they talked about some of that early times?
Boy.
I don't necessarily recall Mom and Dad having any comments about it, but then it didn't, what you just mentioned didn't really affect us because the interchange was right at our property. So Dad didn't have to go out of his way to go anyplace, to farm or to go to Minokan or to go to Bismarck.
It did take a few acres there, that loop.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Just a few. So,
But
it didn't mess up the section too much.
No, I don't think it bothered mom and Dad because that was a piece of property that was just kind of laying at rest, unused.
Yeah.
As that now the approach is now on where the original homestead was, and so there was a hole there that had been underneath that log cabin. So and to us it was an unusable tip of that section, so it was fine.
Good. Yeah. Yeah. So your dad readily accepted it.
Right. But he was a wheeler dealer. I mean, he got along on it.
Yeah.
Well, and
he
Dad
was a smart man.
And Dad and Mom were for progress. I
Right.
imagine that they could see the positive thoughts about having this 4-lane highway.
Mhm.
And Dad loved to drive fast, and of course he could drive faster on the interstate.
Yeah.
Right. So I've always wondered about this. Why did the decision between 90 and 94? What I mean, that our 94 or their 90, whatever, changes. That number changes.
Okay.
And why is it one and the same sometimes?
Okay. The U.S. Numbering of roadways.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Even numbers.
Yeah. Well, Wisconsin was the very first state to number their highway system in 1917. North Dakota does theirs in 1923.
Mm-hmm.
So the road that you knew as Highway 10 was originally North Dakota Highway 3.
Oh.
And the Highway 3 now that goes north of Sterling was originally North Dakota 10. And So the state marked their highways first, ours in 1923. In 1927, the federal highway system was identified. And that system goes from north, from Canada, south. So Highway 2 is in northern North Dakota. Highway 10 comes across your farm, your hometown, Minot. And then so forth down to the Mexican border. When the interstate system was established, they had to come up with a numbering system for that. And they went from south to north. So they're thinking, okay, we can do 10 routes or 9 routes. We're going to start with I-10 down on across the southern United States. So they're going 10, 20, 30, 40, 90 up into South Dakota. Oh, we want to build from Detroit to Minneapolis to North Dakota to Billings. Well, all we got left is, we'll call that 94.
Just offhandedly.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
So that's kind of how we got 94. And then the north-south interstates start on California and go east. By
Highway
5.
101. 101 is the west one.
Yeah.
And notably, or east-west, even numbers, north-south, odd, for the most part.
Yeah.
Well, Ben, we're nearing the end of our time of our fun chat.
We are?
Okay.
Yes. And can you tell us about the Prairie Public video that people could watch? They could Google and learn more about North Dakota's highway systems.
Yeah. I was involved with 2 of them. One was Rivers, Roads, Rails, and Air, which was done in the late 90s. It's kind of in a general history of transportation in North Dakota. The one specific to the Red Trail was titled The Old Red Trail. Bob Dambeck, who's passed away, was a producer on those. Chuck Suki music in the second one, and they're great songs all about travel across North Dakota. And that was done maybe about 15 years ago. And if you Google a Red Trail video, a Red Trail story, you're gonna find it. It's about 55 minutes long, and I'm going to take personal credit for this. Like you ladies wrote When the Windmills Watched. I was involved with hundreds of projects at the DOT and Highway Department. But the Red Trail story that Prairie Public did was my idea. And I was able to get the Highway Department, DOT, to fund it. And we had Prairie Public do it. And it's really the 20th century story of that transportation route across the state of North Dakota from the 1910s up through the 1990s. It was wonderfully done. Great interviews. One of the quotes I really like is a lady from Tappan. She, they ran a gas station there, and she talked about coming out and servicing gas and making money on the repairs they did. Then she talked about cleaning the windshield, and the quote was something like, "We had to clean that cow stuff off the windshield."
Cow stuff, yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, viewers, this has been a wonderful conversation, learning about the history of travel, you might say, but especially the road surfaces and how they were built in North Dakota and how they actually started and why they started with Mr. Ben Kubischta. And Ben, we thank you so much for being our guest today.
It was a pleasure. Anytime.
Thank you. You've made traveling and highways a very interesting topic. My mom called it that ribbon of highway, the gray ribbon. Okay, so we do thank you. Don't go away, though. We have to just finish up here to remind viewers of your colors. The blue thumbs up button, please. acknowledge that, and the red subscribe button. So please do that and tell your friends and even your family about the 1950s Fun Chat. Until next time, toodaloo.